Hey guys, how you guys doing today? Welcome to this episode of Clay's Cortex, the podcast. I know it's been a while. It's been crazy with COVID, and we just got to adapt a little bit. So I'm actually really excited for this episode. We've got Mr. Mack, Mr. Greg Mack from Columbus, Ohio.
Go Buckeyes.
Physicians, go Buckeyes. Just a fields. Yeah, he's in Columbus, Ohio. Physicians Fitness, and the founder and creator of Exercise Professional Education, which is the home of the Muscle Systems Specialist course, which has been very helpful for me in my career and so forth. And I'm just really excited for this discussion because I texted him this weekend, and I was like, hey, I think we should do a topic or a podcast on communication, how powerful it is, and how that helps our clients and so forth, and really how that applies with the world and how we communicate. So yeah, communication. So I guess I'll start off with this, Greg. How important have you seen communication be within your practice at your facility, your space, and so forth?
Well, thanks for having me, Curtis. Yeah, talking about communication is an important thing to communicate, right? So
I know, right? Yeah.
So communication about communication is important because it's in the value equation that that we present in the course. Plus communication is after the other variables that we look at.
Right.
Practitioner IR status or self-esteem, technical capabilities, the client's emotional needs divided by availability of service, right, and the cost of delivering the service. So yeah, all these things are rounded off by your ability to communicate them. And what we're trying to communicate is a challenge because it's a very technical thing. When you're trying to help somebody with sensory motor system issues and pain science stuff.
Right.
And that's tricky business to communicate about.
Yeah, I feel like the beauty of what you just covered, all those different factors of essentially through the course, MSS course, all those factors that come into it. I think us being able to communicate that is crucial because I'll be honest, I remember when I went through the first weekend in Ohio, and I was overwhelmed with like the amount of information. And yeah, I know that deep down the body's complex. And then how do I describe to people what it is that we do? And I think that over time I've gotten better at communicating. And that's just been something, like it's been another skill I've had to work at, just like the technical side of things, taking notes and so forth. But I believe that I've become a much better communicator, and the better I can communicate what I'm going to do or what I would like to do or where the pathway we want to go, people are like, okay, I understand where you're going with that. And I think that the communication aspect is crucial. And we know, and I might get these percentages wrong, but body language, was that 75%? Was that Moravian? Am I saying that right or wrong?
Albert Moravian's research, on how meaning is transferred in communication, right? And, it's 55% physiology, 38% vocal tonality, and 7% are the words.
Right.
Again, not to discount, the intellectual and academic content of the words, but when you're face to face with somebody, at least, is what Albert was researching.
Right.
Was okay, we're picking up a lot more of what the person is trying to communicate through their face and hands and body, and whether they yell at you when they talk or talk real slow and soft. So it's a really important thing, our ability to leverage all aspects of how communication is
for sure
and delivered.
Which I think is very interesting, and how much I think body language or physiology plays a factor. And I've realized that, gotten better at recognizing that when I'm talking to people and how to communicate with them, or when I show them something of like, hey, we need to do your health history questionnaire per se. And sometimes I've had that response of where people are like, I start walking them through it, right? And they're like, they start to pull back a little bit. Like, whoa, that's a lot of info or whatever it is. And then when you explain to them with like, hey, analogy, right? And I think it's another form, we'll get into that during this talk, is if I can give them an analogy of why we're doing this, they're like, oh, I understand that. And reading that body language makes a huge difference. And that takes practice, takes time. But I think when you get to that place when you can really understand where they're at and so forth, we build that trust. And then we can actually break down walls to really communicate at a better manner, which takes time. Trust takes time, you know. But yeah, I mean, if I go back to the analogies thing, or how effective in your practice, I've seen it's work well with me, and I've really learned to leverage this when communicating complicated topics to clients about your nervous system or your muscular system, or really just your whole entire body, which is a system made of systems. How well have you seen analogies help people, and when did you start recognizing that was something of a great tool to use when communicating?
Yeah, I mean, I like analogies. I use them often. I tend to try to find out what they do for a living, or what they do with their time every day, and then try to build analogies from their world. You know, if I'm talking to a lawyer or an accountant, or a soccer mom, or whatever that
Yeah.
is, trying to leverage their world and build analogies out of that, connecting them to our notion of systems and information flow and governance, which is really kind of where we're coming from.
Hmm.
And so I mean, probably early in my career, I recognized the need for analogy and metaphor and parable and allegory and storytelling, right?
Right. Yeah.
To try to
What?
help somebody.
Yeah, which I think is really cool, and I think when we can make those complex things that we're trying to convey to them understandable, they can almost wrap their heads around it and be like, okay, that's great, let's go from there. Or it might open up another door to where they can ask another question, and they're like, oh, so you know what I'm talking about a little bit. Okay, cool, that's great. But we were able to use something that was relatable to kind of like merge those gaps of communication. Which I think is great. I think analogies are very powerful, or parables. I think parables are very powerful, obviously. But yeah, I think what's really interesting is if we look at nowadays and how we communicate via text, the more so, right? That's happening more and more. I remember when I got my first text in high school, actually. I got my first text on my flip phone. That thing was sweet, right? Like,
Wow.
got my first text. I was freaking out. I thought there was something wrong with my phone, and I responded back. And my mom was pissed at the end of the month because the cell phone bill was through the roof. So it was like 10 cents a text or something like that, right? So I'm like, bam, 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 bam. Mom's like, what's going on? And she dragged me down to Verizon, and that wasn't good. But what I thought was interesting nowadays is that we mainly text. And I find as an exercise professional, muscle system specialist, I found that people really just want to text to get information from us. And they want me to explain via text or an email what we do. All right, to give essentially the elevator pitch, or kind of what I do through an email. Me personally, I don't think that's a very effective way to communicate what we do. How do you feel about that?
No, yeah, I mean, I clearly, for as sophisticated and technical as approaches we take to what we do, there's just simply no way that it could be communicated via a couple of sentences in a text. It's crazy, and it doesn't do them any good to even attempt that, right? And so anytime someone's interested, and that's why we teach what we teach in the MSS course,
Right.
in terms of communication flow, is okay, use the text or the email as the quick, fix for pieces of information that someone needs, the instant gratification, the simple approach, and then convert that to at least a phone call where you can get the vocal tone part in with the words, and then to qualify them really for the face-to-face consultation, where we can use physiology and we can use vocal tone and we can use words in a much more powerful way, and understand them better, because we get to see their physiology and hear their vocal tone and the words they use, so that, again, communication is clear understanding, right, is really what we're seeking here.
Well, I think that's kind of interesting, right? If I talk about, I read, maybe it was an article early, the first lockdown we had here, which was kind of around the country. It was interesting. There was an article that was on the news, and they were talking about essentially like dating. and how they're dating. I mean, there's apps and stuff for dating. I don't know much about them, obviously, because I'm married. But it was kind of interesting because they're talking about how younger generations were really appreciating the lockdown because it's instead of like in person putting on a show, right? Which can happen in person if we do that, like give us the right answers or whatever it is. If they're on a date, they really enjoyed being able to talk to the person on the phone first. There was no pressure, right? And so what hit me about that, which was interesting, they got to know the person before they went to the in-person when they were able to get outside of lockdown. I think the phone call qualification or dialogue is very crucial to see like, hey, if how you want things to go is not how I do them, I want to convey that and be like, hey, it's okay if we part ways right now. It's totally fine. When it comes to you setting up or what you've taught us to set up the communication, like say I get a text or an email and then we go to a phone call and this, how effective and when did you really learn to communicate that? Because what I feel like with that process is it's putting the client's interest at heart, like their interests first to make sure we can do what they need help with. Does that make sense what I'm saying? I kind of went on a ramble there.
No, well, I think that again, it was probably early in my career when I realized that what I'm doing is not a retail, go shopping at the mall, take it off the shelf product or service.
Right.
It's a relational dynamic that's process oriented and it's a higher price tag over time and to try to treat that as a retail operation not only discounted the value of my service, but again gave the consumer a false sense of value and expediency and things, and so it didn't set up expectations properly.
Right.
And so I searched for ways to structure a win-win expectations communication process so that all of it was out on the table. Everybody was well informed, fully informed about what was happening, why it was happening, and to see whether or not there truly was a fit or a match, going forward. So yeah, so that was the idea, kind of a linear input, black box output process, and as a trained engineer, that's operating complicated systems. That's how we worked. Was okay. Here's the input. What do we want for the output? What's everything got to happen in between so that we get the output we want given the first input? And so I just kind of followed that relatively linear logic, and attached the psychological and emotional components to that.
I think that's really cool. And I think when I first heard that from you, and as I've been made aware of that now, like I'm not going to try and say I've always known this, right? Like I've always known that.
That's called the hindsight bias, right?
Like I've always known this. No, I didn't know this.
I was born with all of this knowledge already in my head. There's nothing new to tell me.
I know it. Yeah. Oh, I think I heard that back in junior college. Yeah, maybe it was like vague, right? Like it's just there, so I just know it. And what's cool though is now that that's been on my radar, the more and more I listen to books. I try to listen to a book a week, whether it's on different topics or whatever. It's not textbooks, obviously. Like I can't bang that out, but I usually read textbooks. But with Honor and his sleep schedule and Light's being Light, doing her thing, wanting to learn all the time, I can't sit down and read as much. I'm picking up a lot of these concepts that other people are saying in their books, which I think is really cool that I can recognize those things now. And when I can recognize those things, it almost helps make me a better communicator. And what I found over time is the communicator that I become. What's interesting that I found is that the community around where I'm at, the way that they speak about me is like, he'll be honest with you. He'll be straightforward. Right. And so what's been interesting is that linear process you just talked about. It's a completely different experience. I know this is an extreme as into versus going to buy a car. Right. It's a completely different experience, obviously. Well, hopefully. And I think that's been interesting to me, and it's refreshing because like me personally, I'm passionate about what I do and I want to communicate that to people. I think I do a good job of that. And I get so passionate sometimes that I speak really fast. And so I've had to work on slowing down. Which has been good for me. But what I've found over time is that I actually feel like I have ethics when communicating what we do and trying to deliver to them what we do, which has been refreshing. And when I can communicate that with honesty, it really does help me, which has been great, you know. So I feel like that's actually a good amount of feedback from other people from the MSS course. I know that we wrestle with it at first, right? With being honest, not necessarily being honest, but like being upfront, talking to them, figuring out if we're a good fit, being honest. It just takes time to be okay with that. And that goes back down to, or I guess back to the whole IR thing, right? Like, am I okay? Am I not okay? Which that's a great book too. I'd recommend that book too. So, you know, this is interesting. Now, I digress from there. Let's move on to the next thing. So let's go back to analogies a little bit. When it comes to you communicating what we do, and I know you talked about whether it's a lawyer, a soccer mom, you know, I don't know what else you said, but do you research those things to communicate better to the client, to give those analogies, or how do you go about that with becoming better at giving analogies?
Well, it's in that document that you get in the MSS course at the end of the thing, section 13, where we talk about analogical reasoning, and you know, it's a structured cognitive process. I mean, so people who are involved in, you know, pedagogical learning and understanding and philosophy, and you know, they've looked at this. It's like, what is analogies, and how do they really work?
Okay.
And so I give you the ideas, and the rationale of analogies is based on, you know, systematicity principle, the idea that connected knowledge is preferred over independent facts, right? So we're trying to get something they don't know about connected to something that they do, so that, and that, you know, that's like a simile in some sense, right? And then structural mapping theory, where you have target domains, and you're trying to get a new idea or concept that the receiver just doesn't have any understanding of, and so they call it a source domain, where you as the sender remembers a similar problem, and there's an answer developed, and so there has to be some relationship between these two objects, these attributes that you're trying to compare, and you know, it comes with some assumptions. You assume that, you know, some of the material you're going to use for the analogy in place of some technical term that they have an understanding of already, and that then the person kind of compares and contrasts these two things to see how they're connected, right? And so, you know, analogies well constructed have these characteristics, and so what can you come up with in someone's regular experience of life to do that? Like, so in the example I give in the handouts I provide in the course, right, is, you know, ligament control, right? How does someone understand what a ligament does?
Right.
And technically, you know, a ligament control is based on an absolute limit in joint motion, and that muscles have a role in relationship to the limit under different forces. And if muscles fail to regulate forces appropriately, then ligaments are stressed, and they can degrade the integrity of the material or the cells of the ligament. You know, so you're telling that to a layperson, you know, they're like, what the heck are you talking about, right? And so, you know, what are the three domain items that are critical? Well, one, you know, that ligaments have an absolute limit to their structural capability, right? There's a boundary. So what can we think of as a structure, something that this is indicative of that idea of absolute limit, right? And then force acting on a ligament to stretch it. Like, what's the thing that makes the limit tested in the ligament? And then how does the structure of the ligament dictate the direction and limit of the motion, right? And so you have to have those ideas, and then think, okay, well, what can I think of in real life where there's a boundary, and there's kind of something with some tension on it, and there's something on the other end pulling on this thing that's creating tension, and then how that's being controlled, right? And so I give you the corral and the horse and the handler and the rope and its length, right? And that the ligament is like the rope that the handlers got tied around the horse's neck, and the corral is the fence that, the horse can't get past without breaking it. And if the horse, which is the force, is pulling on the rope very strongly, you're going to put a lot of tension on that rope and you might break the rope.
Mm-hmm.
And so the handler is kind of like the muscles trying to regulate that. So there's some tension. So the horse stays in the direction and stays near the limit of the corral, but doesn't go beyond it.
Right.
So you got to come up with these ideas and see the direct relationships, right?
Right.
So how do you get that key understanding that when there's high forces on joints and ligaments, like during sports and exercise, ligaments are trying to control motion because the muscles have lost their ability to control the forces, effectively adjust the length and tension of these tissues, and the ligament becomes the only thing that controls the motion at the extremes. Then the ligament gets stressed and damaged like a rope would if it's pulled on too hard, right?
Right. Which is cool. I mean, I think the thing that I think how I'm wired also is I like to be creative. And so I think to come up with different analogies with different people in different fields, or something that we have, like you said, relationship to, works really well. And I think what's worked best for me analogy wise is if I can actually understand, like, my wife works at Microsoft. And so getting it, like, I just kind of listen to her talk sometimes and understanding, technology a little bit better, or how to do this and this. And I know there's different organizations within the, it's like a system and systems that, business, and there's these little different orgs and how they operate, work together, and being able to, if they're from Microsoft, they come in, parent, adult, whatever it is, and be able to relate to them. And they're like, oh, one, they appreciate that I understand, how they work in their roles in their organizations. But when I can actually then peel back to their org and communicate, well, at your place, you guys communicate like this and do this. And so it's similar to like this analogy. And they're like, well, that makes sense, And they're like, well, I don't know why, like, for example, with COVID and how that hitting, and they're mainly working from home, meetings have gone up exponentially. I mean, exponentially, right? So it's hard to get work done and so forth. But which I think I'm fine to say that. But anyways, so the more and more meetings there are, right? Their time is getting divvied out throughout the day. And I tell them, like, well, it's just like your muscles. If you keep overworking that muscle, right, and you just keep getting this weird sensation here, it might just be that area is just stressed out. I don't know yet. I haven't assessed you. It's just like when you're at work. When you're at work and you're like, I have to do these certain projects done by this deadline, but then they all of a sudden pile on multiple 30-minute meetings back to back to back. Your workday starts to go away. It's going to stress you out more. You can't get as much work done, and it's almost like you mentally collapse, right? Or like you downregulate. It's the same thing was happening with your muscular system, right? You might just be working this area too much. It might be coming from somewhere else, and just going from there. They're like, oh, that makes sense. I'm like, because like COVID's happened. You guys meetings about, and they're like, wow, yeah, that's kind of like what's happening, right? We did your phase 2, and this is what we saw, right? And there's, oh, it's interesting. And so I think what's fun about that is I think that the description of communicating to the client throughout the entire, I would say, relationship, working with them through maintaining their muscular system, the analogies continue to grow upon one another over time, which is really cool, where we can reflect back to the first one and then build upon that. And then we can take it's almost like pulling back a veil, right? Pull back the veil. Here's act 1, and then act 2 builds upon it, act 1, and you can be like, oh, I didn't realize now act 1 set this up. And I think that's the beauty in communication when it comes to building those relationships, and you can start to grow that over time. And that's why I found that analogies have been powerful, because as I've noticed over time with having clients that have been with me for years, right, as I'm teaching them and educating them on their system, they have more questions. Like, okay, I got a handle on that. And they want to move on. So the analogies have to continue to change. It's like, oh, well, this is like this now. Remember, similar to this, but it's like this. And I think that's kind of the fun part. And then I think that the people that end up staying with me for years, right, and have, which is many, has been really cool to see them appreciate that form of communication over time and how I continue to pour into them, which I believe, like you said earlier, adds to the value of what we do, right?
No, man, no question about that. You don't want to hang around somebody that, when they're talking, you just have really no idea what they're saying. You're going to leave pretty soon.
Right.
So,
okay, I'm out. Or that's overwhelming.
like a foreign language. I'm like, okay, well, I don't know what you're talking about. So that's fantastic for you, but clueless for me. I don't like feeling clueless. I'm leaving.
Yeah, I guess that goes back to what we talked about just briefly earlier on about like you're making them not feel okay. And so if they're not feeling okay, you can't build that relationship, right? So which is I think is interesting, right? Like
Yeah, when you're, you have a college education, maybe an advanced degree or something, and a medical license, and you've spent, years and years and tens of thousands of dollars learning these $10 words. And I'm a logophile. I love words and figuring out what they mean and how to be more accurate with them. And I use, $10 words sometimes and $6 words, and catch myself trying to realize, okay, wait a minute, I better be careful here about that. And, um, how can I, and it's hard for me to come up with sometimes a similar,
right.
simpler way to say something. And so analogies are a great way to replace $10 words.
Yeah. And I see the efficacy of using a $10 word, right? To speed up a process. I'll never forget when I was in class and I think Glenn Owen was like, Greg, I got a question. I'm gonna say it wrong. You said pedagogy. How do you say it? Pedagogy. Yeah,
Pedagogy,
like you said that word, and I was like,
pedagogical.
yeah, I was like, I think that's the root from this. And then all of a sudden, Glenn and Roland were behind me, and Glenn was like, you know how Glenn talks,
Mm.
Greg, I got a question. What does that mean? You're like, oh, and then you had to pause and go through it. And I'm like, man, but the thing is, words are powerful. I mean, I think they can make a massive impact, right? Like you said, tone. We talked about analogies. I thought it was funny you started like when they're yelling at you, like people that do that, they just feel like they gotta, hey, hey, but you're like, are you mad? Are you okay? No, it's just how I talk or whatever it is. I think it's really interesting, and I think that what I've found over time is that within the fitness industry in general, I think that's a piece that's missing that I've observed is the communication aspect, where it's more so like, this is how, like I before COVID hit went into a gym that they didn't know me, and I wanted to run through what it was like to do an initial thing because I like to put myself in scenarios of what's going out in the culture. Because like if I'm being honest, here at the gym at the Kiln, Curtis Training, like we're in a bubble, right? So like how we do things, how we operate, and so forth. But I have to make sure I stay open minded with what's going on outside of this quote unquote bubble of fitness. And I felt like I did this for 3 experiences. I'm not going to name the gyms, but 3 experiences, different gyms for initial, like this is what you'd go through and stuff. And I just feel like they were just trying to just pump me up, like, which I'm not saying is a bad thing. I'm not saying it's a bad thing versus like, well, I'd ask questions like, well, how are we going to do that? Well, you're just going to do it. You know what I'm saying? We just got to get to the work and be consistent. You're here 3 days a week. And, and I'm like, okay, well, what's the process you're going to go through? And they couldn't explain it to me or how they want to do it or what their methodology or how they, worldview, body view, how they like to approach the exercise process, which is fine. But I feel like if we do a better job of communicating across this field, I feel like it's going to help us level up as a community and be more so respected. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, again, when you're talking about spending years and years and your identity and your role are just totally merged together, and you're proud of your intelligence and the hard work that you've put in and the knowledge that you've gained, and you have a belief, an understanding you want to defend, get defensive, and we sound accusatory. I was just talking to a mutual friend last night who turned me on to this, new app called Clubhouse, right? Which is
yeah,
like
audio,
audio messaging, right? Now so getting away from text and getting the vocal quality involved, the vocal tonality involved in the communication. And so he was saying, I'm in these groups and I'm, asking questions and they're telling me I'm too aggressive, right? And they don't like it, because he's asking hard questions. And when people say stuff that he doesn't agree with or that they can't back up, they feel like they're cornered. And people don't want to feel defensive, but we'll often use our intellectual capabilities to put people on the defensive or come off condescending, even though we may not want to.
Right.
Because because we're protecting our turf, our intellectual turf.
Right.
So,
Right. I think that's interesting. I haven't gotten deep into the app. He invited me last night. I think it's the same guy.
yeah.
But it's just interesting because when you're married to, or like you said, defending your turf with something, whether it's a belief or whether it's what you paid for and what you've been taught and so forth. Yeah, I think it can come off as defensive, which then can almost shut down the entire communication process that's happening versus like, if I have a client come in, like, what have you done before? And they'll say whatever, XYZ. I'm like, oh, how was Z? They're like, they feel that, right? Well, I really liked doing Z. It just didn't give me all the way, or whatever, however they explain it, right? And then all of a sudden it's like, boom, that disconnect just happened, right?
Mhm.
So I think that our tone, how we communicate is crucial, but sometimes I think we need to listen. How important do you think listening is to being an effective communicator?
It's probably the most important aspect of it, independent of the words, right? And so, like, Socrates and the Socratic method were kind of based on your ability to listen well and formulate relevant questions,
Mm,
uh, to maybe move somebody along towards a particular proposition or establish a proposition through your questions, without necessarily just making these dogmatic or affirmative statements to present your
right.
proposition or your idea. And so, I think listening gives you the ability to, formulate a relevant, poignant, timely question.
Mm,
Because if you're really in the present, with the other person, and not just looking at them talking, but hearing their words and trying to interpret their vocal tone and their body language,
right.
you can definitely be clearer and more precise with your own communication.
I like that. That was a great. I mean, well, obviously I like that, but that was a great answer. I mean, I think that, which actually I need to look into Socrates a little more. It's kind of interesting because I think I agree with that. I think listening is, I don't want to call it, maybe like, I would say, like, in my mind, what popped to my mind is like a lost art where we're not really
It's
hearing
lost.
people.
I mean, look at our modern political system. It's a nightmare of nobody wants to listen to anybody anymore. You're going to
Right.
have to do what I say, or you're dead, or we'll send you to a concentration camp, or, we'll censor you
Right.
because we don't want to communicate with you anymore, really.
Right. Which I
It's-
think is interesting because, and we're seeing that before our faces. I mean, we're seeing that right now. It's going on, and it's like, if we can't get to that position of being able to hear one another, how can we actually make a change for what's good? And if I relate that to whether it's for people in America, and how do we do what's best for them since they elected us, or how do we, as the trainer, exercise professional, muscle specialist, how do we actually provide for them what's best for them? And I think that if we can actually listen to them, interpret, ask questions to figure out, okay, what I do, this will help them, or we are a good fit, or yeah, you want to come in for a quick fix. That's not how I operate. And if you're going to go that route, if you really want to go that route, I think you should go somewhere else. Maybe direct them to where to go. And I had a client of mine. He is an oral surgeon, great guy. I love this guy. He's talked to me a lot, but he always says this thing. He's like, I've had people that work for me, and when I need to let them know that they're no longer working here, he goes, how can I help you find greener pastures elsewhere? I thought it was a polite way of like, you're fired, but and I thought that was interesting because if I look back at the tone and how the words that we use, that was like a polite way of saying, like, this is not working out.
Yeah.
And he said, and he's like, every time I've said that, he's like, it's worked out well, and I've helped them and found a better fit for them, or whatever it is. I'm like, that's kind of interesting, because if you just tell somebody like, you're done, peace, get out of here, kick rocks, that's a different, even though it's the same thing you're conveying, it's completely different response from another person, which I think is interesting. Like, the words and how we combine them, use them, and so forth are crucial. I mean, the same goes to exercise, though. I mean, it's like, it's all tied together. I mean, I don't know. It's the same thing, exercise. How we implement it, how we use it, how we dose it, how I use my tone, how I communicate it, the words I use. Don't use this word with this person. don't say don't, or however they interpret things. I think that whole process, that's crucial to understand, and communication is just massive, you know?
Yeah, I'm doing a workshop or a webinar with MedFit coming up on motivational interviewing, which is, very similar to what we already teach in the MSS course with transactional analysis and Morabian's research and the neurocognitive sciences on communication. But yeah, the prefix COM literally means together in association, right? Completely, right? Compromise. These are structured specifically to include in the word itself what the intention is. The intention with communication is togetherness, association, right? I'm going to be with you, not just me barking orders and you obeying. That's not really necessarily communication.
Right. Interesting though, right? Which I guess we talked about politics. That's what's kind of happening. There's no communication. It's more so here or out.
It's gone.
Which, yeah.
Nobody
I
wants
think
to hear anymore.
No, yeah, I agree. Nobody wants to hear anymore. I think it's just really interesting. Yeah, man, which is pretty cool. I mean, communication is great. It's crucial to use. I think it's a skill. I think it's a skill that we all need to work on and look within ourselves, right? Just like with any other skill, driving a car, lifting weights is a skill, swinging a bat, throwing a ball, swinging a golf club. All those things are skills. And I think they're just things that we can work on within ourselves to become better communicators. And I think what's interesting though is if I think about it, and it's kind of a tangent, I guess, is I wonder how we can help people communicate better, and we don't have to go into that, but we have schools for, well, I guess, I don't know, Toastmasters. That's a great option, right? So I guess we can plug them. Don't know anybody from there, but hey, I heard about Toastmasters through Mack. I actually went to one recently with a guy here that I went to church with, and he told me, he's like, come check it out. I was like, okay, I've heard about it. Let me check it out. And it was cool, putting ourselves, getting reps, I guess, right? So getting reps of getting better at this thing, and you're around in a safe place where people can be like, yeah, you didn't communicate that very well, or whatever it is, and you're like, okay, well, what can I work on? Maybe
how do you know? Yeah, I mean, how do you know someone understands what you say? Just because you said it doesn't mean they understand it. So understanding is, again, a reciprocal process of restatement, reframing, and circling around constructs and ideas, so that when you're communicating and the other person's communicating back with you, you both have a sense of mutual understanding of what's going on. I mean, this is your struggle with your children, right? How do they understand what you're trying to communicate when they don't even, their vocabulary? I mean, Light, how old is Light now? 3?
3, yeah.
3, right? How many words are in her vocabulary?
I mean, she's got a good bit, but you can see her kind of stutter, right? She's trying to gather that in her head, but I feel you.
Yeah, then how do you know that she's got what you're communicating, right? And you have to watch what she does and see how she responds, right? So it's a highly dynamical process.
Gosh, that's pretty cool to think about. One thing we had a talk with Light last night, when she doesn't sleep, she gets a little moody. What I love about her is that when she knows what she wants, and she'll do it and she'll say it, right? She can get a little sassy though, right? She's tough. She's real tough, which I like. But I was trying to communicate to her, that wasn't nice, and Jackie's like, it wasn't, it was unkind. And so I looked at Jackie, and she kind of gave me a look of I've been teaching her unkind versus nice. So I'm like, so she understood, Light understood unkind versus that wasn't very nice what you did. But when I said, was that kind of you to do, or that wasn't that was unkind, she's like, then you see her head, her body language, oh, I know what you're saying, which is cool. And if I go back to the purpose of communication, which I think you just summed it up at the end right there, or what you just said in that little blurb, the purpose of using analogies in communication is to come to a reciprocal mutual agreement of understanding.
That's understanding. You may disagree once you, right? But understanding is the goal there, I think, right? Comprehension and then understanding.
Yeah, understanding.
Yeah, I know. I can understand, I can comprehend, I can contextualize, what you're trying to say now. And yeah, I don't like it, or yeah, I like it. I agree
Right.
with it, right? I don't know whether I like what someone's saying or not until I understand what they're saying.
Yeah.
And
I
so
like that, man. And that's why I think analogies are so powerful,
it's
right?
true.
To get those concepts to understand so we can explain to them in an analogy of this is how I want to go about it versus this is how I don't. Or whether it's a process you want to go and they're like, I don't like that, or I like that. I'm
Yeah,
interested by that.
yeah, they've seen a picture of a trainer in a corral with a rope and a horse, probably, right, in a movie.
Right.
They can't see their anterior cruciate ligament, right, and where it's attached to their femur and their tibia and the direction that it's attached to and what it's doing while a joint, they can't see that.
Right. I hear it. I love it, man. I like that again. I like you said. Can you say it again? You say mutual understanding. How did you say that? Can you just say it again? I
Yes.
like that.
Yeah, comprehension and then mutual understanding, and then communication has really occurred, and now I can be with you or in association with you because I understand you.
Love it.
Agreement's different.
Yeah.
Agreement's a reference to something outside of that understanding. So once I understand you, then I can reference that to my belief system and my worldview, right, and all that, and go, oh, well, now that I understand what you're trying to say, I disagree. Right?
Yeah. I love that. I love that, man. That was great, man. That was great. Communication is crucial, and I think that if we can leverage it more, especially as exercise professionals, and really, if I'm being real about this, I know the title of the podcast, not the title of this one, but it's about physical training, life, and business. And I think that in all those areas, if we can communicate better, whether it's in life with your partner, with your friends, in fitness, when it comes to you working with clients, or as a client, maybe you communicating what you're looking for, and then also business. If we can't communicate enough of what we do or how we want to do or our mission for people to understand, it's going to be really hard for us to execute or go in a direction that we want to go. And I think that's really cool, man. I think that's pretty awesome, man.
Excellent. Yeah. Well, it's been a pleasure communicating with you today.
Hey, it's been great communicating with you, brother. So, yeah, Greg, so if anybody, I know you've been on before, when you had your Buckeye shirt on here at the Kiln, where can people find you if they want to learn more about you, what you do? Where can they go?
www.exerciseproed.com. Get over there. We got an Instagram page as well, right? There's a Facebook page, but if you want to know about, the philosophies and the methodologies, there's free stuff you can download. Go to Exercise Pro Ed. You'll search around, I think, on the homepage, and you'll see some free stuff that'll give you our philosophy and our methodologies and what they're based on, and see what the courses are. And we have the Exercise Explorers Club.
Yeah, that's great, man. Guys, I can't preach that. There's some great stuff in the Exercise Explorers Club. If you're an exercise professional, the amount of, I would call it meat, not milk, right? And it, like I can drink milk, I'm not gonna drink milk the rest of my life, but if I can get on some meat and nourish my body, there's so much meat within the Exercise Explorers Club covering diverse topics when it comes to, and you can get to kind of like, it's like an a la carte, right? Like, I want to learn a little bit about this.
Videos, there's PDF files, there's some blogs in there. So
I love it, man. I love it, man. Well, I appreciate you being on, and day before inauguration. Anyways, appreciate you being on, and thanks for coming on. And guys, thanks for listening to this episode, and we will see you guys on the next episode. Thanks for listening. Curtis Clay and Greg signing out.
Later.